Okay, we're going to be talking about this metametrics research, aligning the Lexile framework for reading to the Common European Framework of Reference. Give you a little background about Lexile in case you're not familiar. So this is a text complexity measure, and it's commonly used to choose what kind of texts are appropriate for various students. Normally used for first language speakers. Um, I mean, the greatest use case is it's used by a lot of schools. You may see different different reading complexity measures, but pretty much everybody these days is moving over to a Lexile, the Lexile framework, so they can, if students move between various leveled reader groups, then we know where they are. We're not stuck with some kind of bespoke system. So the Lexile level really goes from beginning reader 0 up to really high actually, but mostly what you'll see in the reading classroom is somewhere between 100 and 1400 or 200 and 1400, something like that. You won't see much more than that. So the Lexile measure moves really fast in the beginning. So the difference between 200 and 800 is not the same as the difference between 800 and 1400. Once you hit about 1,000, progress slows down a lot. Things get a lot more difficult to progress. But that's not really any different than the Common European Framework of Reference, which lots of people call the CEFR. I've been using it for about 22 years, I think, since 2001, and I call it CEFR. So I'm going to continue to call it CEFR here. You'll see these two researchers from Metametrics, Jing Wei and Alistair von Moore, maybe, did this research. And it's really interesting. I happened to come upon it. So since I'm going to be moving to an international school, it also has a bilingual program. There's an international program and a bilingual program. This kind of research is very interesting to me. I think it's very interesting for most teachers who work in bilingual schools or who work in one of like the tier 2, tier 3 international schools that aren't a DoD school or something like that, where most of the students are actually locals. I'm in China right now, so they'd say like a non-passport kind of international school. In Thailand, that might be an English program or a international program that may or may not be accredited, but most of the students are local speakers. So the way they did this research is, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here. Okay. So the way they did this research is they took a lot of exams that are designed to measure English proficiency. You can see they got the TOEFL here. They got 3 from there. APTIS, they've got 4 from there. APTIS is one that's developed by the British Council. I'm American. I'm not super familiar with it, but I've heard of it before. I had never heard of before. I had to look it up, but it's from Japan. Not familiar with it because, I've never worked in Japan, but there are other countries which have, country-specific tests. TOEIC is a test of mostly used for adults and working adults. It's kind of like a business English test. So all of these test providers have done a lot of research on their tests to correlate them to the CEFR, as you can see here. And they've also begun to do a Lexile evaluation. So they each kind of have a way that they've done they've correlated stuff. But these two researchers from Metametric here have gotten a lot of data, a ton of data from all of these testing providers. And here you can see the total number of students here is 34,000. So that's a really large really large group. You can see the individual breakdown here, you know, um, their Cepher level for each of the tests. So, you know, I mean, that's this table in itself is really, really useful for me. So if I want my students to take the TOEFL IBT before they go to university, then I know that they probably should be B2 level or above, right? So this is good for informing administrators and such about how to set stuff up, but maybe not so useful for the teachers. But we're going to get to the stuff that's useful for the teachers later. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got all of the tests and how they've broken down their Lexiles. For you can see on the left side here, they've got the Lexile score that they've attributed to the score on the exam, and they've also got their estimated Cepher level here. So you can see that each of them, A2 here runs from about 200 to about 700, I'm going to say, for the TOEFL primary. But A2 for the TOEFL junior somehow runs between 600 and, we'll say, 800 maybe. And then you've got that kind of breakdown. We can see this is for the Aptis teens. You know, we go again between 600 and maybe 750. For A2, we can see over here, A2, the more advanced tests are not going to have really good data on the lower Cepher levels. But, you know, the appropriate test here, the ICAN, are the A2 runs from, we'll say 750 to 1,000. You know, that's a little bit different than these others. So, but when we combine all this data, we get some really interesting stuff. So I'm going to run down here to the box plots, which are this is kind of the cool stuff. So once we put all these 34,400 students together, and we do box and whisker plots, we get a very interesting situation. So I teach box and whisker plots to my integrated math students as part of their statistics unit. So why it's good to know math, so you can understand what they're talking about here. So within this box is there are 50% of all the people in this A1 listing here are inside of this box, and this red line is the median. And then another 25% are here up above, and another 25% are here down below. These reds are probably outliers that they've decided are too far away from the median to be reliable. But so we'll have roughly 25% at the top of the box and 25% in the bottom of the box. The red line is the middle of the box. So you can see A1, if we combine all this data, A1 is running between, we want to say like 250 and maybe 550 with a median of about 400 or so. We'll get the actual ranges here later. But what's interesting to note is these the center mass, the 50% center mass of these Cepher ranges do not overlap. So you can see that these boxes are on different parts of the Lexile range, and the gap is actually not too big. So I mean, there's just almost no overlap. I mean, this C1 to C2 looks like it might have just like a tiny bit, but for the most part, there's no overlap. There's actually a gap here somewhere. But it's not too big. It's not a giant gap either. You know, it's a really nice look at this data showing that on average, you know, the center mass of these kids are at a really discrete place in Lexile versus the Cepher score, which there's a lot of Lexile versus Cepher correlations going around, and most of them are heavily very overlapped. So I mean, they would be like A1 would go from, you know, beginning reader to 750, and A2 would go from here 250 to 1,000. That's not really that useful for us as teachers to inform us what we need to do with our students and how we need to teach our students. So when we take that data, they kind of, play with the boundaries a little bit. They come up with a really nice table here to help us as teachers understand um, if I have a student at B1 uh, um, Zephyr level, I know that's their level. I can expect that they'll be able to read Lexile in this range. So I can go to a resource such as ReadWorks, and I can search for relevant articles on topics or skills or whatever that science, whatever that we want to study, and I can find stuff in this range, and I can choose from things in this range, and that will be appropriate for them, and they'll likely be able to do well on it, and they'll pick up reading, um, extra reading proficiency and extra reading fluency off of that, develop their vocabulary. On the other hand, if I'm using a system like I like Read Theory, which kind of tracks a student's Lexile measure day by day. If I assign homework, several times a week, I can look up and see what's the average Lexile for my class, or what for various students. What's their current estimated Lexile level? I can use that to look at to figure out what their CEFR level might be, and that will help me choose what kind of if I'm going to do vocabulary or grammar development, then what kind of grammar or vocabulary development should I choose for them to be to be most appropriate for them. Writing, especially if I'm going to ask them to write, look at this Lexile measure, go and find the correlation for the Zephyr. What are the writing expectations? Those are the things that I can expect them to be able to practice and become better at. And especially if I'm going to use the CEFR, CEFR is really broken down. Clearly, it's not broken; it's broken down. Clearly, then I can find some really good writing exercises for them. And here's this last table 3, but it's really just the same as table 2 here, the first 2 columns. But this is probably the biggest takeaway right here. And again, you're going to want to either start with the CEFR and then start assigning reading in your bilingual program that is appropriate, or if you are in a situation where you're in a classroom and you've got a bunch of mixed kids, you'll want to assign something like Read Theory over a few weeks, figure out what their Lexile range is, and then figure out which of your kids are in which Zephyr band here. This is a really, really interesting piece of research here by Metametrics, Jing Wei and Alistair von Moor, I guess. That's a German name. So I highly encourage you to take a look at this. I'll link the PDF that I'm using down in the description. So thank you for listening to me.